Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the retail market was already in the middle of a major technological shift. Customers were increasingly shopping online, and new businesses that were born in the internet era were somehow taking market share from retailers that had many decades of history, huge physical footprints, and fantastic brand recognition. The pandemic has only accelerated the shift to digital-first services and automation. But what does that mean for traditional retailers? How can they compete in this new world? And to answer some of these questions, I'm pleased to welcome Sebastian Reeve, Global Business Developer at Nuance. Hello, Sebastian.
Hey, Max. How are you?
Very good. The weather is fantastic. We had our haircuts, so that means the pandemic is over.
Done.
First of all, yes, could you tell us a little bit about your work at Nuance?
Yeah, so at Nuance, we're really all about helping brands drive revenue growth and create cost efficiencies. And we do that by helping them create more frictionless experiences. So at any or all moments in their customer's journey with their brand, we can transform that experience just a little bit or a lot. And hopefully that will make it easier for them to do business, and the brand gets all of those great upsides I just mentioned. And the way we do that is we've always taken quite an innovative approach to it. So bringing AI and machine learning technologies into that experience design. But it's really that design best practice as well, right? So designing automated conversations and how to do that and how to ingrain that in business processes, for example, and also provide the tools and techniques required for the world's largest brands to actually bring that in-house and scale it. Which is, so we're not building demos, we're building, real world industrialized applications of conversational AI for customer experience.
Mm-hmm. And yes, so many analysts agree that the pandemic has underscored the importance of omni-channel marketing. And it can take various forms, and we're all familiar with chatbots. Chatbots are everywhere, and we're going to come back to that in a second. But what do you think about voice communications? Do you think retailers underestimate the power of voice?
Well, we clearly at Nuance think voice is incredibly important. For a few decades now, we've been at the forefront of bringing voice technologies to market. That said, I think it's important that we don't over-rotate on any one mode, right? Be it voice or text or anything else. And for me, it's all about balance, really, right? And more importantly, staying focused on customer needs and behaviors. The potential for voice interfaces have inspired us all for a long time, right? It's this idea that you can create a much more intuitive and frictionless experience for users, and that's well proven. I think that the worth of that's proven in many different areas. So, for example, if you're trying to navigate to find something, a product or service, the idea that you can use conversation, and instead of having someone browse through a menu endlessly, you can just say, please tell me how I can help you. And they can say, this is what I'm looking for, and get there, more or less immediately. That's clearly still one of the killer apps in voice technologies. We've used that on the phone channel and now in mobile apps. And obviously you'll find similar kind of technologies in the home with IoT devices as well. So that's a great voice only use case. But if you sort of step back, there are many aspects of the customer journey with brands that are for which a visual complement is still really important. So retail, so if I was choosing a suit, I'm looking for a new suit and trying to discover a product or service, the idea of doing that in voice only would probably terrify me slightly, right? I don't want to have the suit described to me in all the detail using voice. That would be a very slow process and prone to error.
Even though you can do it.
It's possible, but it's probably not the best experience if you design it from the user perspective. So you probably want a more of a visual component to complement as well. The other aspect I think that's really important when coming from the user perspective in designing these experiences is thinking about the role of text-based interaction as well. So you mentioned chatbots, and of course they're quite pervasive, and I'm sure we'll talk about those again in a second. But think about how most of us communicate. It's actually using messaging, human to human. We're all talking to each other, using messaging. Billions of people use messaging as a primary communication channel these days. But actually, messaging, especially asynchronous messaging, which means you don't have to have the whole conversation now. You can come back to it later on, right? And you can sort of keep talking over a period of days if you want to. So asynchronous messaging keeps the history of the conversation in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
So when time is critical, you can actually have customers talking to brands in their own time and not feeling like they're being held up by this conversation now, and they can come back for more later on. And that, I think that's an important mode to pay attention to, because customers, as I said, can come back when they want to, but also you can still escalate to voice, right? Same as you might do with WhatsApp or another messaging app today. You can sort of start in text, figure out what you want to talk about, and if now's a good time, and then hit the voice button and have a voice-based conversation, or even video, or whatever it is you need, and then come back to this text toing and froing messaging conversation afterwards. And I think that's pretty powerful for brands, because it sort of mixes this idea of voice and text and video and other media together into sort of one environment that they can have a much richer conversation. So I think, as I said at the start, it's really all about balance and sort of figuring out what the right way of doing it is, and how to get that in front of the user.
Yeah. So basically, it's not about one tool being the best tool for the job, right?
And it's omni-channel, right? That's kind of the very definition. If you think about that messaging experience I sort of talked to you about, you can move seamlessly between different modes of interaction. You can maintain the context over a longer period of time, and the conversation over a longer period of time. That's the very definition of sort of omni-channel communication, with a brand. So I think that's sort of becoming very important. So it's not just voice, it's not just text, it's not just chatbots, it's not just human to human, but it's all of those, and how we bring it all together, really, with as much personalization as we can.
Yeah. And all of these systems, again, they remember what's been going on. And I guess, if you need to pass it to an agent, the agent is going to have like a small breakdown, well, this is the problem and this is what we talked about, all of those things that are actually designed to help humans.
Exactly. So make it as seamless and as frictionless as you can. I mean, that's really the end goal here.
All right. But so because of the pandemic, many people have been talking about new customer behaviors, right? But how can you measure new customer behavior? So, okay, so you've noticed a shift. Maybe it's your intuition, maybe it's your gut feeling, but how do you create a baseline? How do you get guided by numbers when you're creating these new online experiences?
That's a great question, a great topic. It sort of gets us into the other piece. I mean, we've talked about the sort of technology piece, right? The sort of conversational AI stuff, and we've talked about the design. But the third most important piece is really the data side of it. So what sort of informs that design? How do you know what to design, right? It's all about designing conversations that people actually want to have. Too many things go wrong when we design conversations that people really don't want, right? Rather than listening to them and figuring out what it is they want to talk about. As I think a family member of mine, my grandmother, if I recall, said 2 ears, 1 mouth, Seb. So you should listen more than you talk, and brands should do the same. But you have to launch something. So there's a bit of a catch-22 here. To have a meaningful conversation, you need to launch something conversational. And so, I think it's about really an agile methodology in the end. It's get something viable out into market. Don't try and design absolutely every use case you think you might need or your customers might want. So minimum viable launch. And then it's really about getting that conversational data and having the tools to mine that conversational data, which, it can be a lot of human effort as well. So looking at what customers are really asking for, but then also marrying that to your business processes and trying to figure out what that really means and how best to service that. And then obviously you iterate. So you start to change your design a little bit. If it's a chatbot, for example, or a conversational assistant, change the design. So it's a little bit more improved, and you go back around the loop in a kind of an agile way. But working fast rather than perfecting early is definitely the name of the game, because the other thing that's always going to be true is people's needs change, the way they ask for things and the conversations change. So it's a very agile environment generally. So tools and analytics kind of capabilities as part of your workflow are as important as the conversational tech to make it happen in the first place. So I think that's sort of, it's that design as well as the technology, but then really kind of going through the whole learning loop with real data, so you can start to improve over time.
Okay, but would you say this also, having systems like that in place, it would prepare you for the next disruption? And people who had that in place, again, who listened to their customers, they perhaps, weathered the pandemic a little bit better?
I think that's absolutely the case, especially those kinds of mediums, like I mentioned messaging earlier on. If you were already doing chat and or messaging online, so text-based modes, they really weather quite well. If you think about it, having a voice conversation with a bot, that's fine. But the minute you want to talk human to human, well, in a contact center, everything's engineered to sort of keep the background noise to a minimum in most cases, right? And everyone's in their cubicle and they have their headset and noise cancellation and everything else. The second they go home, because they're sent home from the pandemic from the contact center to go and work there, you have the kids, the dog, the postman. Voice conversations are quite tricky to set up. You're not in a quiet room. You don't even have a home office in many cases, right? So this is tricky, but actually text is pretty easy. It translates quite well to remote working, doesn't suffer from all the background noise and other intrusions. And if you were actually doing asynchronous messaging, it's even better because then the timing's not so critical, right? You don't need to be there waiting now. The customer can wait a minute or two. You can answer when you're available. Again, the toing and froing happens in a little bit more of a less time critical way. So it all translates better to remote working. So those customers who had invested in that certainly reap the benefits, and it made it much easier for them to deal with the sort of customer service transition they had to make very quickly.
And yes, let's talk about chatbots. So would you agree that the statement that chatbots get a bad name in the industry? Like it's just like in customer service, chatbots are considered to be kind of, like cheap, quick and dirty solution. Like you want to save money on your call center, that's it, throw in a chatbot, job done. Yeah, do you think that's the case? And what separates a good chatbot from a bad chatbot?
Well, I think you can insert the word chatbot with any form of self-service and the same kind of principles apply. And I've been in the self-service industry for long enough to know that that's generally a very held belief by many customers. And it's a sad thing, really, because in the end, as I mentioned earlier, design is incredibly important. It's not about throwing in a chatbot. It's about designing the actual experience that your customers need and expect from you. And with design, you usually have a set of goals in mind in terms of that design. So you mentioned sort of saving cost. If I design anything with the only principle of saving cost, it probably isn't going to be the best thing you've ever used, right? And that would apply to a physical product. If I were designing a phone with minimum cost, it wouldn't be, a super, leading device, right? So if you design an experience with cost as the only criteria, you're going to get to the same end goal. You're not going to get the best thing for the customer. So the balance is here. You design really for the customer first. You think about what they need to get out of it, and that really is, effortless and the outcome they were looking for. And our belief really is you get the cost savings by giving them what they want. So, a lot of the cost in the business is not the single interaction you're trying to automate. It's the fact that if you don't give them the outcome, they'll try you again on a different channel. That may be a more expensive channel, right? So it's important you get it right, but it's not, fundamental to chatbots that they all have to be bad. I think there's just lots that are designed without, really thinking through what the customer needs to get, or having done it really, tried, as I said earlier, to try and sort of solve all of the problems. I think the thing with chatbots is they're not going to be for every conversation you might have. There are many complex conversations. There are many advice-based conversations. There are many empathetic conversations which require people. So the key here is use the chatbot for the quick and easy things that actually it can answer now 24/7, 365, but don't try and answer conversations about, a human event like, someone's passed away and I need to close their account down, right? That's the wrong kind of conversation to have with a chatbot. But people don't think always about, what appropriateness should be, and also have humans on hand. So, escalation, the role of the machine is to try briefly, get out of the way and get a person involved and the right person in the right context. And carry the conversation on in a seamless way. And I think if you design with those kinds of things in mind, we see it every day in our customers, the customer satisfaction and the opinion scores of customers actually goes up because they're getting a service that's easier to use. And that's sort of somewhat unexpected because of the, pervasive sort of view in the industry that chatbots don't work. So you can surprise them and you can get really, really good response by doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like in our personal experience, because occasionally you stumble upon a chatbot which is very, very useful and which does everything you ask it to do. And yeah, those cases are few and far between. But perhaps like it goes to say like it is a mixed bag, and it depends on implementation and I guess on the technology partner.
Well, people, as I said, people focus on the technology and not enough on the design. And the reality is we all have conversations, but it's incredibly difficult to design conversations. And no chatbots are having conversations on their own. There's teams of designers behind the scenes that are engineering those conversations, right? So you need people who understand how the best, most efficient conversations humans are human should work, and then how to design that in a machine with a machine. And you have to take a lot of factors into account, like the context of the customer, what's in their head when they're asking that of you, right? There's a lot of deep context that you need to think about. So the words that the chatbot says actually have some meaning to that end user. I've seen lots of chatbots that are using business language, for example, that customers don't even understand, right? They're used between the people within the business, but your customers don't talk your language. So it's really customer first and thinking from there. But that is not a skill that's easy to acquire. A lot of our interface designers, our conversational designers, have been doing so for 10, 20 plus years, and are very, very good at what they do. And I think because this technology has been democratized, it's very easy to go to a cloud-based provider now and get speech and language technology. But that doesn't come with the design expertise you want. Right. So, and a lot of tools are out there today saying they make this super easy for you to do. But it's like the early days of the web. You still need people who are really experienced at web design to design really good websites that people keep coming back to. And conversation is no different.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. Because certainly true when you're talking about design. Yeah, just like good design is hard to find. But if we look at the role of traditional retailers, right, the guys with physical facilities, what would you say is the blueprint for them? What are kind of the first steps they can take to better compete with major online retailers? Like what is it that they need to do better to compete with Amazon?
So, I mean, if you look at the major online retailers, or in fact any of the over the top sort of providers at scale on the internet, sort of major e-commerce, I mean, one of the things that links them all is their relentless focus on reducing friction from the customer journey. It's a huge dedicated effort on their part. It's not just scale and money they throw at it, but it's that effort to make it super seamless. So if you think about the whole of the customer journey, from discovering the brand and product or service all the way through to transact to post sales service, everything's been thought of, or the majority of things have been thought of to reduce that friction and unnecessary work on behalf of the customer. And I think, traditional retailers have relied on obviously physical stores and the people within them, their great workforce to do a lot of that, and are not used to, digitizing really that relentless sort of friction and process re-engineering and improvement over time that's required. So I think it's that relentless focus. The other piece of this, though, is, for me, is when you look at, retailers like Amazon, is the effort they put into personalization is pretty incredible, right? So I don't get anyone's Amazon experience. I get mine. I'm going and logging in. It's making recommendations based on my prior purchase history. It gives me easy access to my prior orders, so I can reorder, or I can cancel an order, or I can get if I absolutely anything I can think of in terms of questions and answers based on the products I've ordered, or post support. So thinking about all stages of those journeys, it's highly personalized because they're using the data about me to engineer those experiences. And I think that's also for physical retailers, though, I think there's potential advantage there in a way if they can really bridge the digital and physical experiences together, because those stores and the people within them are hugely valuable, but the digital experience is a massive complement. So we're seeing now during the pandemic a lot of curbside pickup, right, or buy online, pick up in store, digital to physical experiences where you're sort of bridging the best of both. And the better retailers I've seen are also doing that with returns, for example, right? So return in stores, brilliant, because you don't have to wait in for a delivery driver if you're not there to come back to your house. You don't have to package it back up and find a whole roll of tape to package it up with. right? It's all of these things are just thinking about it from the consumer perspective. How do I kind of, lower that frictional point in this part of the journey? So I think there's definitely a role for physical digital experiences and how they marry together.
Yes. And it's, if physical retail wasn't important, Amazon wouldn't be trying to move into physical retail as hard as they do right now. And just a couple of weeks ago, they opened a hair salon in London. So that's a new market where they're, again, like it's physical facilities. They really want our physical footprint. So in addition to Whole Foods network, obviously. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how it develops forward. And yes.
Well, there's a massive market in post-pandemic haircuts, as we already discussed. So I think that's, they're quick to spot the boom.
Yes. All right. So we've talked about the sort of like the more obvious uses of your technology in communications, but what are some of the less obvious applications for speech analysis that you guys are also working on? For example, I know that you talk a lot about security and biometrics. So could you just outline how you're sort of like, repurposing language data for security?
Yeah, so I think that's actually one of the leading use cases, I would say, of speech technology today, and certainly in industries like banking, but actually it's being adopted by other industries today as well. So voice biometrics technologies and biometrics technologies in general, for us at least, are about two different use cases. So you mentioned authenticating users. So that's really kind of putting you in a position as a customer where you don't have to remember PINs and passwords, because no one likes remembering those things. Or can remember them, particularly if you don't contact a brand particularly frequently. You can't remember the password you set up when you created a user account. So what voice biometrics does in that case for authentication is you enroll your voice print with the brand. And there's two different ways of doing it. Either you can do it in self-service and the machine asks you to say, my voice is my password, a couple of times. And then next time you make contact, you can just basically say, here's my username and my voice is my password, and then you get straight through. It's so your voice is absolutely as unique as a fingerprint in when you use it in that sort of a way, and that's obviously very frictionless. You don't have to remember anything. And the other use case for authentication is actually human to human. So we do sort of more text independent. So like you and I are speaking now, it's registered my voice print, and basically you start maybe a phone call and you say, hi there, welcome to my brand, how can I help you? And we don't have to ask any security questions. You basically just say, hey, yeah, I'm was traveling last week and I'm wondering if my credit card's going to work or whatever it is, or I bought these items online and I'd like to take them back into store. And that amount of voice saying anything you like is already enough to authenticate and verify the individual. So the conversation starts with the customer's real need, not with a minute and a half of security questions if they're required. So it's really exciting from a frictionless experience perspective. The other major use case, which is hugely important and valuable, especially during the pandemic, is the use of voice biometrics and other biometrics for analyzing and identifying sources of fraud and fraudsters. So, I mean, during the pandemic, I saw a stat the other day that fraud is up well over 200%. As fraudsters, the bad actors out there exploit the fact that customers are having to use different processes with many brands than they used to. Mm-hmm. And that's a great exploit, right? They don't know how it's supposed to work, so fraudsters can step into that kind of void. What voice biometrics does here is it can also be analyzing your voice and defining whether it's a real customer and which customer it is, but also is it a known fraudster? But also not just the speech, we can also analyze the conversation, other device characteristics. Is it your usual phone or laptop you're using? Mm-hmm. Is it using the same language you normally use? Or is this actually the kind of language a fraudster might be using, or we've seen a fraudster use in the past? So yeah, there are many different uses of these kinds of technologies just to really help brands to defeat this kind of fraud and help protect customers.
Okay, well, that sounds fantastic because quite often when you use I'm thinking in banking, when you use like their customer services, it's usually a critical scenario. You have lost a card or somebody made a transaction on your account and you don't recognize it, and you're already in a critical situation. And I've been in that situation, and you really don't want entering your address and your postcode and like trying to remember your password because yes, it's late and you might be in a foreign country and you have no money. So this idea of truly frictionless authentication authentication, it sounds amazing. Again, 2FA, right? Designed to solve industry problem, two-factor authentication. But the process is so finicky. And this is something that essentially guarantees a very high level of security, certainly high enough to be used in banking, and it's already out there and it's already protecting customers. Sounds amazing.
I think it's the trade-off between the usability and how easy and seamless it is, and the security piece, right? So normally, if you want to increase security, you have to make it harder as well for the customer to use, like ever increasing lengths of passwords, right? You get to the point where no one can remember a password. It's very secure, even to the customer. So we're sort of trading off those two kind of factors in the equation in a different way. I think what it gets really interesting, particularly if you think sort of back to sort of the retail segment, one of the biggest goals we mentioned earlier is deep personalization. The problem with trying to personalize is it only really works if you can authenticate everyone and get them to log in all of the time. So the easier you can make it to authenticate, in a really trivial way, like every time I use my app or the website, I'm going to authenticate myself at least to some level, the more opportunity for personalization we now have. Because we've got to do personalization thinking about the privacy of an individual as well, right? Can I use that data of yours? Is it really you that's here right now? I can't really use your data if you're not here on the website. It might be someone else, right? So it's all tied up, really, I think, security, personalization, and this sort of low friction experience to sort of really moving the needle in terms of what's possible from a personalization perspective. So it's very exciting.
Well, all right. Well, sooner it becomes the standard, the better. And until it does, we're probably going to keep an eye to the ground and basically look out for these applications. Thank you very much, Sebastian Reeve, so a business developer at Nuance. It's been an absolute pleasure, and good luck in your work.
Thanks, Max. Great talking to you.